Okay, Lewis, let's start out with the big question. Why would independence benefit Californians?
Well, I think that California should become independent, and I think it answers the second question because it'll increase the quality of life in California and it'll reduce the cost of living in California. And so those are the two primary reasons why I would like to see California secede from the United States because we want to do something. I mean, I think it's the responsibility of anybody who pretends or wants to be a leader to want to improve their society in some way. And so I believe that the best way to improve society in California and to get to the root of the problems that we have is for California to become an independent country.
There's this meme online that if California were independent, its economy would be bigger than that of India, the UK, or France. But doesn't the Californian economy really depend on being a part of America? I mean, what are Hollywood and big tech San Francisco without the rest of the United States to back it up?
Yes, of course. And I think that it's important to point out that when we're talking about seceding from the United States, we're not talking about seceding from planet Earth. I mean, we're still going to have California located in North America. We look at the United States and the other 49 states as our neighbor, as our brothers and sisters, American brothers and sisters in North America. So I don't think that seceding from that country is going to exclude us from being able to continue to trade with them, do business with them, continue to make movies. I mean, in California is Hollywood, like you pointed out, but a lot of times the Hollywood actors and film crews go across the country to film in other states. I know, for example, The Walking Dead was filmed in Georgia, for example. So I don't think that seceding from the United States politically is going to stop that type of business from taking place.
Well, the breakup of the Soviet Union led to those ethnic republics getting a lot poorer and becoming completely pointless on the global stage. So why would California have a different destiny than, say, the depopulating Baltic states, the completely impoverished Central Asian states, or the genocidal Zimbabwe of Europe that is Ukraine?
Sure, it's a great question, and I think that you're bringing up an example of where there was a breakup of a union that led to the breakaway states becoming poorer or less stable. But there are examples out there where the separation of states led to success. Look at Czechoslovakia, for example, broke up into two states that are not at war with each other. It was done peacefully. More recently, we have the example of Brexit, where the United Kingdom is a country that broke away from, so to speak, another union, the European Union. It was done peacefully, it was done legally, it didn't lead to war. And now there's, I think, going to be another referendum in Scotland, for example, where they're going to try to secede, so to speak, from the UK. Again, doing it legally and peacefully. So, yes, of course, there's examples out there in the world where things were not done, peacefully, or they were not done in a way that led to wealth for those who separated, but I think that there's just as many examples of those countries where things were done right, and we can do it right in California. We can do it in a way where we do it legally, where we can do it peacefully. A lot of people bring up the American Civil War as an example of the American situation. Well, the American Civil War didn't happen because the states seceded from the Union. The states had voted to secede from the Union for months prior to this outbreak of war there. What started the war there was when the southern states attacked the Northern Army at Fort Sumter. They physically attacked them. So in our plan for California secession, we're not going to create armies and attack the American military anywhere.
Okay, so you said the core reason of why California needs to leave is that it's having all of its taxation money sucked dry. All right, so how does this process of siphoning money away from California actually work? Could you please describe this in great detail?
Sure. Well, I think that one of the biggest resources that we're losing is our tax dollars in California. And the reason I say that is because I know that maybe you're aware of it. There's this kind of term called donor state. And, some states in the United States, not just California, so we're not just trying to say this is only California suffering in this situation, but California is one of those quote unquote donor states. And that means that every year, on average, we pay more in federal taxes than we receive back from the federal government in some form of federal support or direct payments, loans, grants, etc. And so it's not the case every year, by the way. Some years, it fluctuates, goes up and down. But we're talking about an average over decades here. And we're talking about this situation over the period of decades. California's on the losing end of that situation. A case in point is 2019. It's the last year for which the tax records are complete and available. California that year paid $160 billion more in federal taxes than we received in some sort of form of federal payments. And so what we'd like to tell the people of California is what would we have done, what could we have done in that fiscal year had we had an extra $160 billion in our budget. I mean, we have a lot of problems in California that we can't solve, mainly because we just don't have the money to do it, and people don't want to borrow the money in order to fix those problems. We have to put on these referendums on the ballot all the time for bonds to build housing, for bonds to build infrastructure. Well, we could do these things if we just kept California's taxes in California. And that's really what one of the great benefits is, and that's one of the big resources that we're losing, is because when we speak about it frankly, we're subsidizing the other states in this union. And then in California, we don't have the money to pay for our own infrastructure. We don't have the money to pay for our own education and healthcare and fixing our problems. We have to raise taxes on our own people. That's kind of the worst part of the situation. Not only do we not have the money, but then we end up having to tax our own people twice to make up for the difference.
Well, let's be honest. Not everyone is going to like the idea of you trying to break a very important part of the United States away. Aren't you kind of concerned that some guys in fancy uniforms from a certain five-sided building are going to come looking to talk to you?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because we are advocating something that is a political idea. It's something that many people believe in, and we're doing it. And the key part is we're talking about doing it peacefully and legally. I mean, there's Supreme Court precedent that lays out how a state can legally secede from the union. So we're not talking about, going to create militias or going out into the mountains and hanging out there, and just creating these bands of rebels somewhere like you would see in history maybe. This is the 21st century. We're talking about following a legal path, a peaceful path. We outright reject violence as a method of gaining our objectives. And so that's what I think really makes it different, because a lot of people talk about that kind of question, like, you're talking about seceding from the union. Is it treason? Is it sedition? And so on and so forth. Well, we're not talking about overthrowing the American government. We're not talking about attacking military bases or bombing federal buildings like Timothy McVeigh when he wanted to pursue his political goals. We're talking about a referendum. We want to put a referendum on the ballot that allows the people of California to vote to leave or to stay in the union. And then after that referendum takes place, we'll see what we're going to do, because maybe the people of California, when it comes down, would vote to reject independence. Well, then let the people's will be heard. What we want to do is put that referendum on the ballot and let people vote. So in the 21st century, a campaign in a political effort to put a referendum on the ballot to allow people to vote in the so-called freest country in the world, I don't imagine could lead to some kind of civil war. And even if you take in consideration the fact that this is now the 21st century, everyone has a cell phone. We have TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. I just can't imagine, the American military sending its troops and bombs and jets to bomb Californians because we simply wanted to hold a vote to remain or to leave the American Union.
Recognition is a huge part of politics. Some nations don't recognize other nations, and if you don't get enough recognition, you're not considered a nation by anyone. Recognition of election results is very important, because if not all parties agree that an election was legitimate, there could be, something like a civil war starting. So recognition is very key. Now, say you actually do conduct a referendum, the referendum comes back a winner, and you go to Washington. What's going to make Congress or the president acknowledge or recognize the results of your referendum? What's going to force them to just sort of go along with it?
Well, not that he would have to go with it, but you're right. I mean, recognition of California independence or any nation's independence is a crucial part of becoming a country. It's the necessary part. I mean, you can declare independence all you want, and if no one recognizes it, then you're not really a country. And to expand upon what you were saying with South Ossetia, the same thing holds true for Crimea, which is, in the eyes of Russia and a few other countries, a part of Russia, but most of the world recognizes it as part of Ukraine. So that recognition is very important. So I recognize the importance of that question. But what we're doing in California is not just, we have three avenues that we're pursuing when it comes to recognition and that agenda. We want to talk to the people of California about why they should support independence. That's talking about, for example, the quality of life and the cost of living. We want to talk on the national level with the American people why they should let California go. And third, we want to have an international conversation with the countries of the world why they should recognize California as an independent country if we hold a fair and free election and a referendum and it passes. So we have three different angles that we're approaching this issue because we recognize the importance of that recognition. But first of all, people of California have to recognize that they want it. And if that passes, like your question was asking, then we're going to go to the Americans and say, and provide them with the arguments as to why they should accept that. And we believe that if you look at the political situation in the United States, if you look at the animosity, the political ideology, the gridlock in Washington, a lot of it's based upon the fact that, well, in our position anyway, we need to have in the United States what we call a political divorce, a national divorce. And if you take the analogy of divorce, we know that many couples who live together and are married, they're in a bad divorce, bad relationship, often have a better relationship after they're divorced. And they can live cordially and peacefully when they're not in each other's hair, when they're outside of the dysfunctional household. We see North America, when it comes to the context of the United States, as a dysfunctional household. And if we can get California out of that dysfunctional household, then we believe that we will be able to maintain the peace in North America. We'll be able to make things better and before they get worse. And frankly speaking, I think that, for example, the people of California, if we're governing ourselves as we see fit according to our values and our culture, and the people of, for example, Texas and Florida don't have to have those, crazy, loony Californians telling them how they need to live in Texas, then I think that the people of the United States and the people of California, which are two different cultures, by the way, could get along much better than they do now.
Well, to be honest, as an Ohioan, a true Rust Belt legend, I do have to say I've gotten real sick of Californians looking down their nose at us. I gotta tell you the truth, man.
You have, I mean, we're kind of joking about it right there, but there's a lot of people in the United States that really don't like the impact that California has on their culture. There's that expression that they say, as goes California, so goes the nation. Well, so many things that are against, so-called conservative ideology started in California and kind of spread from there. So if we can get out of each other's hair, I think that we can live in a better relationship with the other states and people of the continent.
America's always sort of had two sides of the same coin, right? The left and the right, Federalists, Anti-Federalists, North and the South, and Democrats, Republicans, and so on. But just because we have these two different sides of the same coin doesn't mean we should throw a silver dollar in the dumpster, you know what I mean? So are you really getting at that you think that there should be some sort of greater ideological mission to split up America? I mean, I'm an Ohioan, and Ohio can sometimes go left and sometimes go right. Where would we even fall in this?
So I respect the idea of trying to come to compromise and work together and try to solve problems. We in our campaign we just simply think that we've gone beyond that point. We don't see things getting better. We see things getting worse in culture when it comes to political situations. So we don't think that either the left or the right is going to be willing to make a compromise with the other side. I mean, we're talking about a country right now where if you don't toe the line on the left, you're a fascist. Even if you're like 95% of the way a Bernie Sanders supporter, but on one issue you don't agree with them, all of a sudden you're a fascist. So there's such extremes now in American society, and in California too, by the way, where we don't have that ability to just have a civil conversation and say, let's come to the table, put down what we believe, and come to some middle ground agreement. I don't think that that's possible because there's no giving on either side. And I'm talking about the conservatives as well. And so what I think that's different about, for example, you mentioned Ohio. Ohio's right there in the middle of a massive American population. If Ohio, for example, were to separate or try to separate from the United States, you're trying to draw lines there that would separate populations of, say, like Erie, Pennsylvania from Cleveland, and maybe Pittsburgh from like Canton. Those populations are relatively close to each other. Cincinnati and Louisville. So you're drawing lines there that are going to basically, arbitrarily separate populations in metropolitan areas. But California is a pretty distinct geographic location. If you look at the geographic and the population distribution in the United States, most of the American population lives east of the Mississippi. And then you have this, Great Plains, which is not sparsely populated, mountains sparsely populated, Arizona, Grand Canyon sparsely populated, and then you have this enormous new population on the West Coast called California. And so by separating California from the United States in that context, we're drawing lines through deserts and mountains. And it's not going to disrupt, I think, the communities as much as it would if you took, for example, Ohio out of the United States, or Virginia, or Delaware, or something to that effect, because we are a distinct society, like Quebec in Canada, like Catalonia in Spain, and like Scotland in the United States.
Look, I'm an Ohioan who lives in Russia. I know a thing or two about politicians who love to squander tax money with no shame like there's no tomorrow. But what makes you think that if you get your California independence, that things are going to be different? Okay, you have more tax money. Won't it just be squandered like all the other tax money? I mean, California's pretty legendary for its questionable uses of its funding.
Yeah, sure, I understand. And to be honest with you, it's not a guarantee that the money will be used effectively, because government is government and politicians are politicians, and they're going to do what they're going to do, no matter if they're like you're talking about in Russia, and whether we're talking about California politicians. This campaign for California independence is not a cheerleader for government. It's not a cheerleader for Sacramento. It's not to say that, for example, Sacramento is this great benign government unlike any other government the world's ever seen before. So we're going to have the same problems. But I guess to answer the question, having more money in those coffers in California and let them misuse it at least allows more money to be appropriately used. Because at the end of the day, I think what happens is government California uses the money where they need to use the money ineffectively. But having more of that money to ineffectively use, I think at least gets more jobs done, if you get what I mean.
So why is this whole CalExit thing your personal quest in life? And I mean, were you even born in California?
So right away, I was not born in California. I am from Buffalo, New York. I like to say that I immigrated to California back in 2006. I consider myself kind of an immigrant to California because, like I said, California is a unique and distinct society. And when I moved to California, I felt that difference. Kind of like when you go to a different country. And now I'm not saying that going from New York to California was kind of like maybe going from Ohio to Russia. That's a massive change in culture shock. But there's difference. Just like if you were to go to Canada, for example, you'll see some differences. You feel some differences. And so I felt, as a New Yorker going to California when I moved there in 2006, I felt a difference in culture. My mindset changed over a period of time. I know Jerry Brown was talking about how he once referred to California as a separate nation, and he was referring to that as a California state of mind, kind of a different nation in the context that we have a different ideology in California. And so I kind of bought into that, and I had this California mindset, and I have this California mindset today that's different from American mentality, different from the mentality of the people of Russia. And so from that context, I'd say that California is kind of a distinct society, and I moved from New York, and I felt that difference. But how this all started was I moved to California, and I had some problems with the American government when it came to their position. Well, let's say not even really position, because their inaction would be the better word. Inaction of the federal government when it came to immigration reform back in the early 2010s, 2011, 2012, and 13. And that was an issue that personally touched upon me because I had a Russian wife at the time, and I was trying to work through the system to legally make her a resident of the United States so we can have our family together. And every day I turned on the news, and Washington just couldn't do anything. And I watched American reaction from the large part from American public in the East Coast and the South, in Texas, for example. A lot of anti-immigrant sentiment was coming from that side of the border, outside of California. And so I had all this kind of negative feelings about the American government can't do anything, and the people of California don't like immigrants, not the people of California, people of the rest of the United States don't like immigrants. And I heard a lot of that, and it was very troubling. And so on the other side of that equation, here I am in California, a place very welcoming of immigrants, bending over backwards to help immigrants. And so I kind of lost my loyalty for the United States based on the way that their policies and politics and the mentality of the American people interfered in my personal life and my family. So therefore, I moved on, and I said, well, what if California became an independent country? That would just solve all these problems, because I live in a country that would accept my wife at the time as an immigrant and a tax-paying resident of the state of California, and I wouldn't have to be struggling to try to make a visa or this or that. And so I just started thinking about the idea, and I came across a man who I continue to work with today, Marcus Ruiz-Evan, who's now the leader and president of the campaign. And he wrote a book called California's New Century, or Next Century. And he was talking about making California more of an independent kind of subnational sovereignty entity within the United States. And so we met in 2014. We started to combine our ideas. We were talking about, subnational sovereignty ideas, devolution like in Scotland. And then eventually over time, we evolved from what we called Sovereign California, which was an organization dedicated toward making California like an autonomous region of the United States, so to speak. Kind of like in Russia, by the way. I think there's autonomous regions that are different from oblasts, for example. And we wanted to make California kind of like an autonomous region that was more free to set its own policies on immigration, on agriculture, trade, things of that nature. But we understood that over a couple of years, we were traveling around the state talking to people about that it really was kind of a wonky political conversation about, you want to take a state and make it an autonomous region. And so we're sitting there trying to explain to people what that is, something kind of foreign to the United States. So we eventually evolved, and especially with the inspiration that we received from Scotland in the 2014 and 2015 independence campaign, to just go for independence and make California an independent country. And so that kind of evolved from, like we were talking about in the beginning, by the way, trying to negotiate a middle ground. So in the beginning, this campaign didn't start off as, oh, let's just secede from the Union and cut ties. In the middle, the first couple of years there, we were working specifically to try to create a middle ground where California would still stay a part of the Union, but would have more autonomy. And we realized that wasn't going to work. And as more time went by and the political situation got worse in the United States and the animosity grew and the divisions grew, we just realized that it's time for us to have a national divorce.
I believe you mentioned before that there's a Californian way of thinking. Could you please describe this mindset? What is this Californian philosophy?
Yeah, I think that you're talking here about, when it boils down to, California values. And I think that when you are a Californian, or you come to California, you live there for a period of time, you're going to change the way you see the world. And I can give you a personal example for myself. I know that I used to be a prominent activist who was against marriage equality, and I worked for years on that issue and became, the bus driver that led the tour for the National Organization for Marriage to go around the country and oppose marriage equality. We went to, I think, I don't remember now, 21 cities and 17 states, talking about traditional marriage between a man and a woman and why we should oppose same-sex marriage. And it was during that tour that I actually had a change of heart on the issue. But that was after I had moved to California and after I had started to live in California and been exposed to that kind of new mindset and that culture in California, which is open and more welcoming of people and diversity. And so I think that, to simplify it, I would simply say that the California mindset is one of acceptance and tolerance and diversity and peace. Those are kind of the values that I think, if California became an independent country, that we would pursue on the international stage. That's one of the benefits of becoming an independent country, by the way, is that California, as the 5th largest economy in the world and would be a member of the United Nations, would be able to use that platform as that 5th largest economy in the world in the United Nations to promote those values of peace and tolerance and justice and equality and so on and so forth around the world, instead of just doing it within America, because we've talked about how California, as goes California, so goes the United States. Well, what about as goes California, so goes the world? That's kind of a bigger agenda, I think. And those are the kind of things that we want to do. We want to change the world by making California an independent country. So this is not just a campaign of, well, let's just secede from the Union because South Carolina tried and they failed in the 1860s. We want to change the world. We want to make the world a better place. We want to make California a better place. We want to make the American country, the United States, a better place by California leaving it. And imagine, a country where the United States, the people of the United States, generally a right conservative country, will finally be able to govern themselves according to the values that they have, and not have California influencing that. Same thing goes the other way around, where California can then pursue the agendas and the policy preferences that it pursues. So the California mindset and the frame of mind I'm talking about is one of accepting diversity, basically. If I had to choose 2 words, I'd say accepting diversity.